The room erupted in applause when my father raised his glass and announced, "Next week the whole family is going to Hawaii for another celebration." Smiles spread like a reflex. Laughter bounced off the walls. Someone whistled. I smiled too because that's what I had been trained to do. I imagined ocean air a week where I wouldn't be on my feet, a rare stretch of time when I could just exist. Then I asked the most ordinary question in the world. What time is the departure? My father didn't even look at me. His smile stayed fixed as he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You don't need to know. You're not part of us. You can stay behind and take care of all the kids." The applause died in my ears. 30 faces stared. I felt the floor tilt, not because I was shocked, but because something I had always known was finally spoken out loud. My name is Claire Rowan. I am 29 years old, and that night at my father's birthday party, I learned exactly what my place in my family had always been. Before I tell you what I said next, and before I tell you how that sentence set off a chain of events no one saw coming, stay with me. If this story touches something familiar, follow along, subscribe if you want to hear how it ends, and tell me later if you've ever been the one expected to stay behind. Now let me take you back because this didn't begin with a party. It began years earlier in ways so small they were easy to ignore. My father's birthday was meant to be a milestone. 60 years. A catered dinner at our parents' house in the suburbs, white siding, trimmed hedges, the kind of place where nothing ever looks out of order. I arrived early as usual. I always did. By the time the first guests rang the bell, I had already spent hours setting up chairs, arranging platters, and making sure the children had snacks before they got underfoot. No one asked me to. No one thanked me. It was simply understood. That understanding had shaped my entire role in our family. My father, Robert Rowan, liked order and appearances. He liked things running smoothly without having to ask how they ran. My mother, Elaine, measured success by how impressed other people looked. My younger sister, Lauren, had mastered the art of being admired without lifting a finger. She had a husband with a good title, 2 small children, and the unspoken assumption that her needs came first. I had flexibility. That was the word they used. Flexible meant available. Available meant expendable. I parked my car on the street because Lauren's SUV always took the driveway. I wore simple dresses because I would be moving in and out of the kitchen all night. I memorized the children's routines, their allergies, their bedtime rituals, because someone had to. Over the years, those small accommodations added up. Holidays, birthdays, long weekends. I was the one who arrived early and left late. I was the one who filled the gaps so no one else had to notice them. At the party, I circulated with trays while my father soaked in congratulations. I refilled glasses and redirected children away from sharp corners. A woman I didn't know smiled at me and asked if I worked for the caterer. I opened my mouth to correct her, then closed it. My mother stepped in and said, "Oh, that's Claire. She helps." The woman nodded, satisfied, and turned away. When my sister arrived, the room shifted. Lauren always timed her entrance perfectly. My parents rushed to her side, admiring her dress, praising the children, introducing her husband as if he were a prize they had won themselves. I watched from the doorway, holding a bowl of something warm, feeling oddly separate from the scene I was technically part of. No one mentioned that I had coordinated the entire evening. No one mentioned that I had been there since morning. By the time dessert was served, my feet ached and I realized I hadn't eaten all day. I leaned against the counter, listening to laughter spill from the living room when my father tapped his glass and called for attention. That was when he made the announcement. Hawaii. A family trip. A second celebration. The room responded exactly the way it was supposed to. I let myself believe just for a second that I was included. That belief was a mistake. When he told me I would stay behind, there was no anger in his voice. There was no cruelty, not on the surface. It was said the way you assign a task to someone whose role is already defined. Someone had to watch the kids. I was someone. 30 people watched as that truth settled between us. Some looked uncomfortable. Most looked away. The party continued because it always did. I nodded. I smiled. I said I understood. That was my reflex. But inside something shifted. Not shattered. Shifted. Like a weight finally moving off a nerve you didn't realize had been pinched for years. I excused myself to the kitchen and stared at the sink at my hands steady and capable. I thought about how often I had been told I was needed and how rarely I had been asked what I needed. I thought about the word family, how easily it was used to justify everything and explain nothing. That night did not end with a scene. It ended the way all my nights ended, with me cleaning up after everyone else. But as I washed dishes and folded tablecloths, I made a decision I didn't announce to anyone. I stopped asking myself how to make things easier for them. I started asking myself what would happen if I didn't. This is not a story about shouting or slamming doors. It's a story about what happens when the person holding everything together finally lets go. If you've ever been the one expected to stay behind, keep listening. Because what happened next changed everything, and not just for me. By the time the last guest arrived, the house already felt smaller, like it was bracing itself for the evening. I had been there since early afternoon, moving through rooms that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and roasted meat. Adjusting details no one else would notice unless they were wrong. The chairs had to be evenly spaced. The candles had to be lit at the right moment. The children needed to be fed before the adults sat down so they wouldn't melt into chaos halfway through dinner. I knew this because I always knew this. My parents' house sat on a quiet street where lawns were trimmed to the same height and mailboxes lined up like soldiers. It was the kind of neighborhood that looked impressive from the outside and functioned on unspoken rules inside. Appearances mattered. Smoothness mattered. Anything that disrupted the image was quietly absorbed or pushed out of sight. I had learned early on that my job was to be the absorber. My father, Robert Rowan, had spent most of his career in management. He believed in systems, hierarchies, and people staying in their lanes. My mother, Elaine, believed in presentation. She never worked outside the home, but she treated our family like a brand she was constantly marketing. Dinners were events. Holidays were performances. Every story she told about us was edited for maximum approval. Then there was my sister Lauren, 3 years younger than me, and effortlessly certain of her place in the world. She had always been the one people leaned toward, the one whose needs were anticipated before she voiced them. She married young, had children young, and stepped neatly into a role everyone seemed relieved to give her. Mother, wife, centerpiece. Her life came with labels people respected. Mine did not. I worked remotely as an analyst, a job that paid steadily but didn't sound impressive enough to mention at dinner parties. When people asked what I did, my mother usually answered for me. "She helps out," she would say, the same way she had said it to the woman at the party. It was a phrase that covered everything and explained nothing. It suggested availability without ambition, time without weight. That assumption had followed me for years. When Lauren needed help with the kids, I was flexible. When my parents wanted to travel, I could stay behind. When something fell through, I was the solution no one bothered to acknowledge. I told myself it was temporary. That once things settled, once the kids were older, once work slowed down, things would balance out. They never did. At the party, I moved between the kitchen and the living room with practiced ease. I knew which guests needed refills before they asked. I knew which child would get overwhelmed first and needed to be redirected with a quiet activity. I knew when my mother's smile was about to tighten, the way it did when she felt something slipping out of control. I stepped in before she had to ask. Lauren arrived late, of course, with the confidence of someone who knew she would be forgiven. The children ran ahead of her, scattering noise and crumbs in their wake. She laughed, kissed our parents, handed me a diaper bag without making eye contact. It landed against my hip like an extension of something I was already carrying. "Can you take them for a minute?" she said, already turning away. It wasn't a question. It never was. I took them. While the adults gathered around my father admiring the cake and clinking glasses, I knelt on the floor with my niece and nephew tying shoelaces and wiping hands. I told myself it was fine. I had done this 100 times. I told myself I didn't mind. That was mostly true in the way you stop minding something once you accept it as inevitable. What I hadn't accepted, at least not fully, was how visible this arrangement was to everyone else. As the evening wore on, people began to notice me in the margins. A man I barely recognized thanked me for keeping things so organized. A woman asked how long I had been working with the family. Each time my mother smiled brightly and smoothed the moment over with that same phrase, "She helps." Each time the conversation moved on satisfied. No one asked why my sister wasn't the one managing her own children. No one asked why I wasn't sitting down. The story they were being told made sense to them. I fit into it neatly. When my father made the announcement about Hawaii, it landed on top of all that context, heavy and final. The reason it hurt wasn't just what he said. It was how naturally it fit into the existing structure. Of course I would stay behind. Of course I would take care of the kids. That was what I did. That was who I was. Afterward, as the party continued, I drifted back into motion. I cleared plates, wrapped leftovers, made sure nothing burned or spilled or shattered. I overheard snippets of conversation, none of them about me. Plans were made around me without including me. Flights were discussed. Resorts were praised. Someone joked about how nice it would be to have a break from the kids. I felt something settle in my chest, then something cold and clarifying. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't even anger, not yet. It was recognition. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a system. When the last guest finally left and my parents retreated upstairs exhausted from being admired, I stayed behind to finish cleaning. I always did. The house grew quiet except for the sound of running water and the clink of dishes. I moved through the rooms more slowly now, noticing details I had ignored before. The family photos on the wall. Lauren in the center of most of them glowing celebrated. Me on the edges, holding something leaning in, rarely alone in the frame. I dried my hands and leaned against the counter, staring at nothing in particular. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to justify myself. I didn't run through explanations in my head, didn't rehearse conversations I would never have. Instead, I asked myself a different question. What would happen if I stopped? The answer wasn't immediate. It didn't arrive with a rush of courage or a dramatic plan. It arrived quietly, like a thought you can't unthink once it forms. I realized that everything I did for my family relied on one thing they took completely for granted: my willingness. They had built their comfort on the assumption that I would always say yes. They had never considered what would happen if I didn't. And standing alone in that kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of an evening I had carried on my back, I understood something with sudden, unsettling clarity. They didn't see me because they didn't need to. That night, I drove home through empty streets, the city lights blurring at the edges. My phone buzzed once with a message from Lauren about packing lists and schedules. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, but because for the first time I didn't feel compelled to. As I pulled into my apartment complex and shut off the engine, I sat there for a moment longer than usual. The silence pressed in, unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. I thought about the word family, how it had been used to explain every expectation placed on me. I thought about how easily that word had excluded me when it mattered. Inside my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and set my keys on the counter. The space was small but entirely mine. No one needed anything from me here. No one assumed my time belonged to them. I sank onto the couch and stared at the ceiling, letting the events of the night replay without flinching. Something had been exposed not just to me, but to the people who watched it happen. The party hadn't paused. No one had intervened. That silence told me more than any apology ever could. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet. I only knew one thing for certain. I was done pretending this was normal. The party didn't pause for what had just happened. It absorbed it. Laughter resumed in the living room as if nothing had shifted, as if my father hadn't just redrawn the borders of belonging with a single sentence. Someone turned the music up a notch. Glasses clinked again. I stood near the kitchen doorway, momentarily still holding a stack of dessert plates that were already sticky with tiramisu. The noise wrapped around me and moved on. I stepped back into motion because motion had always been my safest place. When you're useful, you're allowed to stay. I refilled wine glasses, wiped crumbs from the counter, and guided the children toward the den before they could knock into the coffee table. My body knew what to do, even if my mind was still catching up. The party had room for hands, not for questions. A woman I didn't recognize smiled at me as she took a spoon. "Thank you so much for all your help tonight," she said, the way people speak to staff when they mean to be kind. Her eyes skimmed past me to the room beyond, already searching for the next conversation. I nodded and smiled back because correcting her would have required explaining myself into existence, and I didn't have the energy for that. The word help hovered between us like a label she didn't realize she'd pinned on me. From where I stood, I could see the geography of the room clearly. My father occupied the center shoulder's squared voice carrying. My mother hovered just to his right, adjusting the angle of smiles, steering conversations away from anything that might wrinkle the evening. Lauren was surrounded by a loose orbit of attention, children darting in and out of her legs, her laughter ringing out with practiced ease. I moved along the edges, always in transit, never settled. No one asked me to sit. No one offered me a plate. No one needed to. The arrangement made sense to them. At one point, my mother caught my eye and waved me over to introduce me to a couple from church. "This is my other daughter, Claire," she said brightly. "She helps out." The couple nodded, murmured something polite, and turned back to my mother to ask about the vacation. The word "other" landed harder than it should have. I realized then that even my title had been negotiated downward, softened to fit the story being told. Lauren swept past me in her red dress, the fabric whispering against the doorway. She had a way of arriving at moments when attention was already gathered, sliding into it without effort. My parents lit up as she approached. Compliments flew. Someone asked about the kids. Someone else asked about her husband's work. I watched the exchange with a distant kind of clarity. I had done her taxes for 3 years. I knew exactly how much came in and where it went. None of that mattered here. What mattered was the shine. "Can you take them for a bit?" Adam said, appearing beside me with Sophie on his hip and Oliver tugging at his sleeve. He didn't say my name. He didn't say please. He didn't wait for an answer. He handed them over like luggage and turned back toward the living room before I could respond. The transfer was seamless, practiced. My arms adjusted automatically, weight redistributing, responsibility settling in. I took the kids into the kitchen and sat them at the small table with apple slices and water. Sophie spilled juice down the front of her dress and began to cry. I wiped her face, murmured reassurance, tied Oliver's shoelace again, because he never kept it tight. The noise from the party filtered in through the doorway, softened by walls but still present. I was close enough to hear the jokes, far enough to be forgotten. By the time dessert was being served, my stomach ached with hunger. I hovered near the counter, waiting for a lull that never came. Plates passed by me, empty, then full, then empty again. No one noticed that I hadn't eaten. No one thought to set something aside. When you're always around people, assume you've taken care of yourself. I carried a tray back into the living room and felt eyes on me. Not curious eyes, appraising ones. A woman leaned toward her husband and whispered something I couldn't hear. He nodded, lips pursed, in a way that suggested understanding. As I passed, she looked at me with a soft frown that made my skin prickle. Pity, I realized. Pity was just approval wearing a gentler face. It asked nothing of anyone. I caught my reflection in the mirror above the sideboard as I set the tray down. Plain black dress, hair pulled back, hands busy. I looked exactly like the person everyone thought I was. The realization didn't hurt the way it once would have. It steadied me. The strangest thing was how quickly my emotions settled. There was no rush of anger, no urge to confront anyone in the middle of the room. Instead, something inside me clicked into place. I saw the pattern with a clarity that felt almost academic. This wasn't cruelty, it was maintenance. The family performed. The guests accepted the performance. The system stayed intact. I drifted back toward the kitchen and leaned against the counter, watching the room from a distance. Lauren laughed at something my father said, head tipped back, completely at ease. My mother scanned the room, counting satisfied faces. Everyone was where they were supposed to be, including me. A thought surfaced, then quiet but dangerous. What would happen if I simply didn't stay late, didn't fill the gaps, didn't smooth the edges? It wasn't a fantasy of revenge. It was a practical question asked by someone finally curious about consequences. The idea didn't frighten me the way it should have. If anything, it brought a strange calm. For years I had believed my presence was necessary to keep everything from falling apart. Watching the party continue without me at the center of it, I realized something else. They didn't need me as a person. They needed the function I served. Those were not the same thing. I excused myself under the pretense of grabbing more napkins and slipped into the hallway. The noise dimmed. The light changed. I stood there for a moment, hands empty, breathing. My phone buzzed in my pocket with a message from Lauren about schedules and reminders. I didn't open it. I turned the screen face down and let it stay dark. When I returned to the kitchen, I washed my hands slowly, feeling the water run over my skin. The party carried on behind me, buoyant and oblivious. No one came looking. No one asked where I'd gone. They didn't notice I'd gone quiet. And in that moment, I understood exactly how loud my absence would be. I left my parents' house without anyone noticing. The front door closed softly behind me, muffling the music and laughter until it sounded like it belonged to another life. The driveway was empty except for my car parked where it always was, off to the side. I stood there for a second longer than necessary, keys cool in my hand, listening for a sound that didn't come. No one called my name. No one asked if I was leaving. I still had the diaper bag over my shoulder. No one asked for it back. The drive home felt longer than usual. The streets washed in amber light, the radio off. I didn't replay the party this time. I didn't rehearse conversations or sharpen arguments in my head. I felt strangely calm, as if a decision had already been made somewhere deeper than thought. When I pulled into my apartment complex, the gate rattled shut behind me and the world narrowed to concrete quiet and the hum of distant traffic. My apartment was small, clean, and intentionally unremarkable. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a living room that doubled as a workspace. I liked it that way. There were no extra rooms waiting to be filled with someone else's needs. I dropped the diaper bag by the door and set my keys on the counter. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. I moved through my routine without thinking, shoes off, hair down a glass of water from the tap. On the fridge door, a calendar held my real schedule, the one no one in my family had ever asked to see. Deadlines, meetings, time blocks carefully arranged so nothing collided. They called my life flexible because they never bothered to learn how full it was. I sat at the small desk by the window and opened my laptop. Notifications rolled in steady and contained. Messages from colleagues. A reminder about a deliverable due in 3 days. An invoice marked paid. Numbers grounded me. Specifics did. I knew exactly what came in each month, where it went, how much I saved. I had built an emergency fund that could carry me for months if I needed it. I had done that quietly, deliberately, without mentioning it to anyone who had already decided I had nothing important to do. There was a separate account I rarely thought about set up years ago after a conversation that had changed the way I planned my life. Only one other person knew it existed. Aunt Helen. Helen was my mother's younger sister, the one whose name was usually followed by a sigh. She had left town in her 20s, chased something she called a calling, and never came back. In family lore, she was difficult, impractical, a cautionary tale. I had started calling her every Sunday night 7 years earlier, at first out of curiosity, then out of necessity. She asked questions no one else did. How are you sleeping? What are you building? What do you want next? I picked up my phone and called her. It was late, but she answered on the second ring. "You sound tired," she said before I could speak. "I am," I said, "but not the way you think." I told her about the party, the announcement, the way my father said it without hesitation. I told her how the room had gone quiet and then moved on. I didn't embellish. I didn't soften it. When I finished, there was a pause on the line. "Do you see it now?" she asked gently. "Yes," I said. The word came easily. "I do." She didn't ask what I was going to do. She never did. "Then don't explain yourself," she said. "Explanation is a service, too." After we hung up, I sat back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. I thought about all the times I had tried to earn a different role by being better at the one I was given. More reliable, more patient, more understanding. It had never worked because the role itself was the point. My family's certainty about my nothingness had become their blind spot. They didn't ask about my work because they had already decided it didn't matter. I checked my phone again. A notification blinked at the top of the screen, time-sensitive, marked urgent. It had nothing to do with my family. Someone needed a decision. Someone was waiting on my answer. I responded, concise and professional, and watched the thread resolve. The contrast was sharp enough to make me smile just a little. For years, I had kept parts of my life separate, tucked away, not out of secrecy, but out of self-preservation. When people don't see you, they don't try to manage you. I had learned that lesson slowly, the way you learn to walk around a bruise without touching it. Staying invisible had protected me more than confrontation ever could. I thought about how often my parents had asked where I was going or what I was doing. Never really. The only questions they asked were logistical. Can you come early? Can you stay late? Can you handle this? Their certainty had freed me in ways they never intended. Underestimation isn't just insulting. It's dangerous for the people doing it. I stood and walked through the apartment, noticing details with new eyes. The stack of notebooks on the shelf, the spare cables neatly labeled, the small plant by the window that had survived because I remembered to water it. This was the life they never asked about, the one that ran parallel to theirs without intersecting. It was smaller in square footage, larger in intention. On the coffee table, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Lauren, this one longer, filled with lists and assumptions. I didn't open it. I set the phone face down and let it stay there. I wasn't angry. I was done offering access to something that had never been respected. Later, as I got ready for bed, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I looked different, though nothing about my face had changed. The tension I had carried for years had loosened just a fraction, but enough to notice. I brushed my teeth, washed my face, moved with an unhurried calm. When I lay down, the apartment quiet around me, I thought about the question that had surfaced earlier in the kitchen. What would happen if I stopped? The answer was beginning to take shape, not as a threat, but as a fact. Things would shift. Not because I pushed them, but because I stepped away. They thought I had nothing to do. That misunderstanding was about to matter. The house was finally quiet. The last car had pulled away. The laughter had dissolved into the walls, and my parents had gone upstairs without saying goodnight. I stood alone in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, scraping plates into the trash the way I always did. Cake crumbs clung to the counter. Sticky fingerprints marked the fridge handle. I cleaned because that was the last role left to me, and because stopping felt harder than continuing. I rinsed a glass and set it in the rack, then another. The rhythm steadied me. I wasn't thinking about what my father had said anymore. I wasn't replaying the moment. I had reached that exhausted clarity where emotions flatten and only facts remain. I needed to send a file to a client whose deadline I had pushed for the party. My laptop was at home. My mother's sat on the counter lid, half open, the familiar hum of sleep mode breathing softly. She won't mind, I told myself. She had borrowed my things without asking for years. I opened the laptop. The screen lit up to a browser already running. Her email inbox filled the screen, unread messages stacked neatly in chronological order. I should have closed it. I knew that. I reached for the trackpad to click away when I saw my name. It was there in the subject line of a thread near the top. Hawaii arrangements. Claire situation. My hand stilled. The kitchen felt smaller, like the walls had leaned in to listen. I told myself I was tired, that I was misreading it, that there was nothing there I needed to see. Then another thought surfaced, colder and steadier. This isn't curiosity. This is confirmation. I clicked. The first message was from my mother, sent a week before the party. The tone was casual, efficient, the same one she used when coordinating catering or seating charts. Keep Claire here to watch the kids. She doesn't have anything important to do anyway. It'll be easier if she stays. I read it twice, then a third time, waiting for the sting. It didn't come. Not yet. I scrolled. Lauren's reply sat beneath it, quick and unhesitating. Totally agree. She's flexible, and honestly, it's like having free help. At least she'll feel useful while we're gone. It's kind of sad, but it works out for us. Free help. Useful. Sad. The words landed one by one, arranging themselves into something undeniable. I felt my stomach drop, not with shock, but with recognition. This was the language of planning, not emotion. This wasn't a misunderstanding that had spiraled in the moment. This was a decision that had been made, discussed, agreed upon. I scrolled again. My father's response came last, shorter than the others. She should be grateful we give her something to do. That was it. No explanation, no hesitation, just approval. I sat back in the chair slowly, the room spinning just enough to remind me I was still human. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the urge to throw the laptop across the room. What I felt was a clean, sharp severing, like a rope finally snapping after being frayed for years. They hadn't forgotten me. They had assessed me. I took screenshots of the emails, my movements careful and deliberate. I emailed them to myself, then deleted the sent copy from her folder and cleared the browser history. The actions felt automatic, almost clinical. This wasn't revenge. It was record-keeping, proof in case my own memory ever tried to soften what I had just read. When I closed the laptop, the kitchen fell silent again. I looked around the room I had grown up in, the counters I had wiped down countless times, the table where we had staged so many versions of ourselves for other people. The place felt unfamiliar, like a set after the actors have gone home. I replayed moments from the past with new eyes. The phone calls that started with, "Can you help?" and ended with expectations. The holidays where my seat was always closest to the kitchen. The praise that never quite landed on me, sliding instead toward how convenient I was. They hadn't forgotten my needs. They had never counted them. I drove home at 1 a.m, the streets empty, the city reduced to traffic lights and pavement. My apartment greeted me with stillness. Beige carpet, white walls, furniture chosen for function, not impression. My mother had once called it depressing. To me, it felt like oxygen. I sat on the couch, in the dark, phone in my hand, the screenshots glowing on the screen. I didn't need to reread them. The words had already etched themselves into me. I thought about all the times I had wondered if I was too sensitive, if I was misinterpreting things, if I should just try harder to be included. Those doubts dissolved quietly, like fog lifting in sunlight. There was an email notification waiting beneath the screenshots, one I had been avoiding for weeks. A reply from someone I didn't quite trust. Good things from yet. I opened it. The message was brief and professional, asking if I was still interested in moving forward and when I might be available to talk. My hands shook then, just a little, not from fear but from the weight of possibility. I set the phone down without responding. Not yet. Tonight wasn't about what I was building. It was about what I was done carrying. I thought about calling Aunt Helen, about telling her what I had found. I decided to wait. Some truths need a moment to settle before they're shared. I lay back and stared at the ceiling, letting the reality arrange itself without resistance. This wasn't betrayal dressed up as concern. This wasn't clumsy love. It was exploitation made polite, wrapped in family language so no one would question it. They had planned my absence from their celebration with the same care they planned the menu. You don't negotiate with people who benefit from misunderstanding you. That sentence formed fully in my mind, complete and unarguable. I felt a strange sense of relief as it settled. For years I had tried to explain myself into a different role, believing that if I could just articulate my worth clearly enough, they would see me. But seeing me was never the goal. Keeping me available was. I got up and walked through the apartment, touching the edges of things I had paid for myself, chosen for myself. I wasn't angry. Anger would have meant I still wanted something from them. What I felt was final. When I went to bed, I didn't set an alarm for anyone else's schedule. I didn't draft messages or plan conversations. I let the phone rest on the nightstand, face down, silent. I wasn't plotting. I wasn't preparing a speech. I was finished. And once you are finished, truly finished, there is no going back. I drove away from my parents' house without looking in the rearview mirror. The street was empty, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own breathing. Porch lights glowed in neat rows, identical and indifferent. Nothing dramatic happened. No one chased after me. No one called my name. The absence of reaction landed heavier than any confrontation could have. At the first red light, I realized I hadn't said goodbye. The thought surprised me, then settled. I had been saying goodbye in pieces for years, every time I left early, every time I swallowed a comment, every time I nodded and agreed to something that cost me more than it should have. This was just the first time I didn't bother to perform the ritual. The drive home was long and uninterrupted. I didn't replay arguments or imagine what I would say if someone called. I didn't practice calm statements or sharpen clever lines. I understood something new, and it simplified everything. I didn't need them to understand me. Understanding was optional. Access wasn't. My phone buzzed once on the passenger seat. I didn't pick it up. I knew the shape of the messages before they arrived. Questions disguised as logistics. Assumptions framed as plans. The same script running on time. I let it ring out and kept driving. When I reached my apartment, the hallway lights flickered on automatically. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, closing it with a soft click that sounded final in a way I couldn't explain. I set my bag down, kicked off my shoes, and leaned back against the door for a moment, feeling the cool wood against my shoulders. My chest felt open, exposed, but steady. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the notifications I had ignored. Missed calls. Texts stacked in a familiar order. I didn't read them. I turned the phone face down on the counter and poured myself a glass of water. The small act felt deliberate, like placing a marker on a map. I called Aunt Helen. She answered immediately, her voice clear despite the late hour. "You don't usually call at this time," she said. "I'm done," I said. The words surprised me with how easily they came out. There was no gasp on the other end of the line, no sharp intake of breath. "Tell me what done means," she said, steady as ever. "It means I'm not watching the kids. I'm not staying behind. I'm not filling gaps or fixing plans that didn't include me. It means I'm not explaining myself anymore." "Are you ready for them to be angry?" she asked. "Yes," I said without hesitation. The certainty in my voice startled me. I felt it settle into my bones. "Then be done," she said, "and don't negotiate." After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and opened my calendar. The entries were color-coded, a mosaic of obligations and priorities. I scanned the next few weeks and began making changes. I canceled standing commitments tied to family routines. I moved deadlines back into my control. I deleted a recurring reminder labeled Lauren, Kids. The empty space that followed felt less like loss and more like air. Fear crept in as I worked, quiet but persistent. The fear of being called selfish. The fear of being cut off. The fear of confirming everything they had ever implied about me. I paused and let it pass through without stopping it. Compliance had never protected me. Silence had never earned respect. Staying had only kept me available. I stood and walked through the apartment, touching the edges of things that belonged to me. The desk where I had built my work. the couch where I rested without interruption, the window that looked out onto a slice of sky no one else had opinions about. This wasn't escape. It was separation. I thought about the difference between leaving and disappearing. Leaving was loud. It invited commentary and debate. Disappearing was quieter. It removed the audience. I wasn't cutting contact in a rage. I was removing obligation. There would be no long explanations, no defenses, no emotional labor spent trying to soften what I had decided. People who benefit from crossing your boundaries don't need a warning when you build them. The phone buzzed again. I didn't touch it. I imagined the messages as shapes rather than words. Pressure, guilt, authority, concern. They were predictable, and that predictability made them manageable. I wasn't responsible for their reactions. I was responsible for my choices. I lay down on the couch and stared at the ceiling, letting my breathing slow. For the first time in a long while, my body didn't feel braced for impact. It felt present. I thought about the emails I had read, the casual cruelty of the language, the way decisions had been made about my life without my input. The clarity I felt now wasn't anger. It was alignment. I picked up the phone once more, long enough to change one setting. I silenced notifications from my family. Not forever. Just long enough. The screen dimmed and the apartment returned to its quiet hum. As I got ready for bed, I noticed a small thing that made me pause. My shoulders weren't tight. The ache I carried there most nights had eased just a little. I brushed my teeth, washed my face, moved through the motions without hurry. The mirror reflected someone who looked the same and felt different. Before turning off the light, I placed the phone face down on the nightstand. No dramatic vow followed. No promise to myself spoken out loud. The decision had already been made, and decisions like that don't reverse because someone demands they do. I fell asleep without waiting for anything to happen. In the morning, there would be messages, there would be consequences, there would be attempts to pull me back into a role I had finally set down. But those were problems for daylight. That night, the most important thing had already occurred. I stopped asking for permission. The call came at 7:12 a.m., sharp enough to feel intentional. I watched the screen vibrate on the kitchen counter while the coffee finished brewing. I knew who it was before the name appeared. My father had always preferred early mornings for uncomfortable conversations when he believed people were weaker, less prepared to resist. I let it ring, twice. Then I silenced it and poured my coffee anyway. By 7:18, the first message arrived. It was short-clipped, written in the tone he used when he believed authority alone should be enough. "We need to talk. You embarrassed us. Call me. Embarrassed." The word lingered longer than it should have. Not hurt, not confused. Embarrassed. As if what mattered most was how the situation reflected on him, not what it revealed about the family he'd built. I didn't respond. 10 minutes later, my sister followed. "Are you seriously doing this?" Mom hasn't stopped crying. Dad's furious. You can't just disappear. Disappear. As if I'd vanished instead of finally becoming visible to myself. I finished my coffee, slowly standing by the window. Outside, the city was waking up without any awareness of my family drama. Buses hissed at the curb. A woman walked her dog, earbuds in, completely unconcerned with my father's birthday humiliation or my refusal to play along. The world, it turned out, did not collapse when I stepped out of my assigned role. At 8:03, my phone rang again. This time it was my mother. I answered. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded without greeting. Her voice was tight, brittle, with restrained fury. "Your father didn't sleep all night. I'm not watching the kids," I said calmly. "And I'm not staying behind." "You're being dramatic," she snapped. "It was just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding that involved telling me I wasn't part of the family." I replied, "In front of everyone." She exhaled sharply. "You always take things too personally." That sentence had been used on me my entire life, a convenient eraser for anything uncomfortable. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I simply let the silence stretch. "Say something," she said finally. "I have work," I said. "I'll talk to you another time." "You're choosing this," she warned. "If you walk away now, don't expect things to be the same." "I don't," I said, and ended the call. The quiet afterward felt heavier than before, but it wasn't oppressive. It was clean. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop, forcing myself into the rhythm of my own life. Emails, deadlines, numbers that added up because they followed rules, not emotions. I focused until the tension in my chest loosened. At noon, Aunt Helen texted, "How loud are they being?" I smiled despite myself. "Loud," I typed back. "Predictable." "Good," she replied. "That means they've lost control of the narrative." In the afternoon, something unexpected happened. A colleague messaged me about a short-term consulting project, a gap they needed filled quickly. The pay was higher than anything I'd taken before. The timing was inconvenient, demanding. A week ago, I would have declined without hesitation, assuming I needed to stay flexible for family emergencies that were never really emergencies. This time, I accepted. The decision sent a quiet thrill through me, followed immediately by fear. The kind that appears when you step into space you've never been allowed to occupy before. I sat with it, reminding myself that fear didn't mean I was wrong. It meant I was early. By evening, the messages resumed. My sister again, this time longer. "You're being selfish. You know we planned everything around you being available. The kids are excited. What am I supposed to tell them?" "Tell them the truth," I thought, "that I'm not your unpaid solution anymore." I didn't send it. Instead, I typed one sentence. "I won't be available. Please make other arrangements." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. "Wow," she wrote. "So you really don't care about family." I stared at the screen, then locked the phone and set it aside. Later that night, there was a knock on my door. I froze for a moment before moving toward it. Through the peephole, I saw my father. He stood rigid in the hallway, coat-buttoned posture straight, the same stance he used at work meetings when he expected compliance. I opened the door. He didn't wait for an invitation. "You've taken this too far," he said, stepping inside as if the space belonged to him. His eyes scanned the apartment with thinly veiled judgment. "Your mother is beside herself." "I asked you not to come," I said. "I'm your father," he replied. "You don't get to set terms." I closed the door behind him carefully. "That's where you're wrong." His jaw tightened. "You humiliated me. On my birthday." "You did that yourself," I said. "I just didn't cover for you." He scoffed. "We gave you responsibility. That's what family does." "You assigned me labor," I said, without asking. "And when I questioned it, you told me I wasn't part of you." "That was a joke," he snapped. "Jokes are funny," I replied. "That wasn't." Silence fell between us, thick and uncomfortable. I could see him searching for leverage, for the right combination of guilt and authority. When he spoke again, his voice softened. "You're making a mistake," he said. "You don't have anyone else." The old fear stirred, reflexive and sharp, the idea that isolation was a punishment worse than mistreatment. I recognized it for what it was. "I have myself," I said. "And that's enough." He stared at me, genuinely confused. "Since when?" "Since I stopped letting you decide my worth." His expression hardened. "If you walk away now, don't expect us to welcome you back." I nodded once. "I understand." He waited, clearly expecting more. Apologies. Tears. Negotiation. None came. After a moment, he turned and left without another word. I locked the door and leaned against it, heart pounding not from regret, but from release. The confrontation hadn't shattered me, it hadn't even surprised me. It had confirmed everything I already knew. That night, I sat at my desk and reviewed the new project details mapping out my week. The work would be demanding, the pace unforgiving, but it was mine, chosen not assigned. For the first time, the cost of leaving felt lower than the cost of staying. And somewhere between planning deadlines and setting boundaries, I understood the truth I'd been avoiding. This wasn't the end of the conflict. It was the beginning of the consequences. The flight to Maui departed at 6:45 in the morning according to the email my sister forwarded by accident. I saw it because she meant to send it to Derek, not to me. The subject line read, "Final itinerary," and my name was nowhere on it. I stared at the screen for a long time before closing the message without replying. There it was in black and white. Proof that the exclusion wasn't emotional. It was logistical, deliberate, planned. I spent that morning working through numbers that actually made sense, then closed my laptop and packed a small overnight bag. Not to run away, to step closer. By noon, I was on the road. My parents' house sat at the end of a manicured cul-de-sac, the kind where every mailbox matched and no one parked on the street unless they were a visitor. When I pulled up, my sister's SUV was already there, trunk open, suitcases lined up like obedient soldiers waiting for orders. Inside, chaos disguised as excitement buzzed through the rooms. My mother moved from suitcase to suitcase checking lists. My father barked instructions from the dining table. My sister hovered near the kitchen island phone glued to her hand. No one noticed me at first. It was the kids who saw me. They ran toward me automatically, arms outstretched, relief written all over their faces. I knelt to hug them, breathing them in, then gently stood and guided them toward the living room. "Go finish your cartoons," I said. "I need to talk to your parents." That got attention. My sister turned first. "What are you doing here? I'm not staying," I said. "I came to say goodbye." My mother froze. "Don't start this again." "I'm not starting anything," I replied. "I'm ending it." My father stood. "You're being unreasonable." I reached into my bag and pulled out a printed page. "Your itinerary," I said calmly. "I got it by mistake." Silence dropped hard. My mother recovered quickly. "That was just logistics. We didn't want to confuse you." "You didn't want to include me," I corrected. "There's a difference." My sister crossed her arms. "So what, you're punishing us now?" "No," I said. "I'm choosing myself." She laughed sharply. "You're blowing this up. It's just one trip." "It's never one trip," I replied. "It's every holiday, every birthday, every time I was told to adjust so you wouldn't have to." My father stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You don't have children. You don't understand responsibility." "I understand exploitation," I said, "and I'm done agreeing to it." My mother's eyes narrowed. "You think you're better than us now?" "I think I'm done being smaller," I answered. For a moment, no one spoke. Then my sister sighed theatrically. "Fine. If you're not staying, what are we supposed to do?" "Hire help," I said. "Like people do when they respect time and labor." "That costs money," she snapped. "So does Maui," I replied. My father's face flushed. "Get out." I nodded once, gladly. Before I left, I knelt again to the kids. "I won't be here when you get back," I said gently. "But I love you." They hugged me tightly, confused but trusting. As I stood, my sister muttered, "Don't expect us to fix this." I met her eyes. "I'm not asking you to." The drive away felt different from every other time I'd left that house. Lighter. Final. 2 days later, the messages started. "Where did you put the medication list?" "What time do they usually nap?" "The hotel says they don't have the right snacks." I didn't respond. On the third day, my father called. I let it go to voicemail. On the fourth, my mother sent a long message about loyalty sacrifice and how family keeps score. I deleted it. On the fifth, my sister texted one word. "Help." I stared at it, then turned my phone face down and went back to work. That afternoon, my new project lead called to say the client wanted to extend the contract. Double the hours. Immediate start. I accepted without hesitation. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my balcony watching the city glow. Somewhere across the ocean, my family was learning what my absence actually meant. Not revenge, not punishment, consequences. And for the first time, they were the ones carrying them. The silence lasted exactly 11 days. I knew the number because I counted them the way people count steps after an accident, cautious, deliberate, half expecting the ground to give way again. 11 days without a call, a text, a demand disguised as concern. 11 days where my phone stayed quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like a held breath. Then, on the 12th morning, my father called. I was already awake, sitting at my desk with the window cracked open, the city humming softly below. I watched the phone vibrate until it stopped. Then I let it ring again. Only after the third attempt did I answer. "Yes," I said. "We need to talk," he said, skipping any attempt at warmth. His voice sounded thinner than usual, stretched tight over something brittle. "I'm listening." There was a pause, the sound of someone recalibrating when authority no longer worked on instinct. "Your mother isn't well," he said finally. I waited. "She's exhausted," he continued. "The kids have been difficult since Hawaii." I pictured it easily. The routines broken, the invisible scaffolding gone, the quiet chaos that only shows itself when the person holding everything together steps away. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. "But I can't help." "That's not what I'm asking," he replied quickly, though it clearly was. "I'm asking you to be reasonable." I closed my eyes briefly. "Reasonable for who?" "For the family," he snapped. "For us." I leaned back in my chair. "You told me I wasn't part of us. Has that changed?" Another pause. Longer this time. "You're being stubborn," he said. "I'm being consistent." His breath came sharp through the line. "You don't understand the pressure we're under." "No," I agreed calmly. "You don't understand the pressure you put me under for years." Silence again, but this one felt different. Unsteady. "Your sister is overwhelmed," he said, lowering his voice. "She's not coping well." "She has options," I replied. "Money. Support. A husband who makes more than enough." "That's not the point," he insisted. "She needs you." I almost laughed but stopped myself. "She needs childcare. Not me." "That's cruel," he said. "No," I corrected. What was cruel was telling me I had nothing important to do. The words hung between us like a mirror. He didn't deny it. "People make mistakes," he said quietly. "They do." I agreed. The difference is whether they expect forgiveness without change. His voice hardened. "So, what you're punishing us now?" "I'm protecting myself," I said. "You're experiencing the result of your choices. That's not punishment. You're tearing this family apart," he said, the old line dusted off and thrown like a weapon. I smiled faintly. "No, I just stopped holding it together by myself." He exhaled slowly. "What do you want?" It was the first time he'd ever asked me that. "I want respect," I said. "I want honesty. And I want to be included as a choice, not an obligation." "That's unrealistic," he scoffed. "So was expecting me to sacrifice indefinitely?" I replied. The call ended without resolution. He hung up first. I sat there for a long moment, letting the quiet settle back in. My hands weren't shaking. My chest wasn't tight. The conversation hadn't drained me the way it once would have. That was new. Later that afternoon, my sister called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail instead. "I don't know what you want anymore," she said. Her voice strained. Mom cries all the time. Dad barely talks. The kids keep asking for you. If this is about money or control or whatever you think happened, we can talk, but you can't just cut us off like this. I listened to it once, then deleted it. That evening, Aunt Helen came over with takeout and a bottle of wine. She didn't ask questions right away. She never did. She let silence do its work. They're unraveling, she said, eventually swirling her glass. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. I don't feel good about that, I admitted. You shouldn't feel good, she said gently. You should feel clear. There's a difference. I nodded. Your mother called me, she added. I looked up. What did she say? That you've changed, Helen replied. I told her no. You've stopped compensating. The words landed softly, but they stayed. The next morning, an email came through from my sister's address. The subject line read, "Can we reset?" I opened it. She wrote about stress, about fear, about how hard it was being the one expected to manage everything. She didn't mention Hawaii. She didn't mention the birthday party. She didn't mention what was said out loud in front of everyone. But at the bottom there was a line that stood out. We really need you right now. I closed the email without responding. Instead, I opened my calendar and blocked off the next 6 weeks. Work, commitments, plans that belonged to me. The consulting contract had expanded again, this time into a longer-term role. I accepted that too. That night as I prepared dinner, my phone buzzed with a notification from my bank. The first full payment from the extended project had cleared. I stared at the number longer than necessary, not because it was extraordinary, but because it represented something I'd never been allowed to have before. Independence without apology. I poured a glass of water and stood by the window watching the city lights flicker on one by one. Somewhere my family was still telling themselves a story where I was the problem. I didn't need to correct it. Because for the first time the story I was living didn't require their permission, and whatever came next I knew one thing for certain. I would never go back to being invisible. The invitation arrived the following Friday disguised as an olive branch. It came from my mother not by text or call, but by email, carefully worded, carefully timed. A family dinner. Just immediate family. No drama, no accusations. A chance to clear the air. I read it twice then, once more slowly. Your father wants to move forward, she wrote. We all do. We can't stay like this forever. Forever. As if what they'd done was a temporary disagreement, instead of a pattern spanning decades. I didn't reply immediately. I sat with the email open on my screen while the city darkened outside my window. I knew what this was. Not reconciliation. Reassertion. An attempt to reset the hierarchy to pull me back into orbit before I drifted too far to control. Still, I agreed. Not because I owed them peace, but because I wanted closure on my terms. The restaurant my parents chose was predictable. Upscale, but conservative. White tablecloths, low lighting, the kind of place where appearances mattered more than comfort. I arrived 10 minutes early and asked for the table under my name. The host checked, smiled politely, and led me to a corner booth. When my family arrived, they looked surprised to see me already seated. My sister came first, eyes scanning the room, calculating. My mother followed, posture stiff, lips pressed thin. My father arrived last, his presence filling the space like it always had, used to being the center, even when no one invited him there. We exchanged brief greetings. Polite, distant. For a few minutes we talked about nothing. The weather, traffic, the restaurant's renovation. I noticed how my mother avoided my eyes, how my sister fidgeted with her napkin, how my father waited for the moment he could reclaim authority. It came with the appetizers. This doesn't have to be so hard, my father said, setting his fork down deliberately. Families fight. They move on. I nodded. They do. When everyone's accountable. My mother stiffened. We didn't come here to be attacked. I'm not attacking, I replied evenly. I'm listening. My sister let out a short laugh. You don't act like it. I met her gaze. Then say what you came to say. My father cleared his throat. Your absence has caused problems. I know I said. That was never the goal. It was the result. You could help, my mother said quickly. Just a little. Until things settle. There it is, I said quietly. My sister bristled. Don't make this sound manipulative. It's not manipulation, my father snapped. It's family responsibility. I leaned back against the booth, folding my hands calmly on the table. Responsibility goes both ways. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable yet. Anticipatory. I spent years adjusting my life around yours, I continued. Not once did anyone ask what it cost me. My mother shook her head. You make it sound like we abused you. No, I said. You used me. Her eyes flashed. That's unfair. Is it, I asked? Because when I questioned being excluded from Hawaii, you didn't apologize. You assigned me child care. My father's jaw tightened. We needed help. You needed labor, I corrected, and you assumed I'd provide it for free. The table went quiet again. A couple at the next booth glanced over. My sister leaned forward, lowering her voice. So, what do you want? An apology. Fine, I'm sorry you felt left out. I held her gaze. That's not an apology, she scoffed. This is exactly why we can't talk to you. Because I don't accept half-truths anymore, I asked. My father straightened. Enough. This attitude is exactly what's tearing us apart. I smiled faintly. No, it's just exposing what was already broken. My mother inhaled sharply. You're acting like you're better than us. I'm acting like I'm equal, I said. The words landed hard. That's not how families work, my father said. That's how healthy ones do, I replied. My sister pushed her chair back slightly. So you're really willing to throw everything away over this? I shook my head. I already lost everything when I agreed to be invisible. This is me keeping what's left. My father's voice dropped. If you walk away again, don't expect us to chase you. I don't, I said softly. That's the point. The waiter arrived with the main courses, tension hanging thick enough to taste. Plates were set down, but no one touched them. You think you're so independent now, my father said. But you'll need us again. I looked at him steadily. Number 1, I won't. My mother laughed sharp and brittle. Everyone needs family. Everyone needs respect, I replied. I'm done confusing the two. My sister's eyes filled with frustrated tears. You're impossible. No, I said gently. I'm unavailable. The words seemed to echo between us. I reached into my bag and placed my card on the table. If you want a relationship, it happens with boundaries. Not demands, not guilt, and not at my expense. My father stared at the card like it was an insult. And if we don't? He asked. Then this is goodbye, I said calmly. I stood before anyone could respond, placing my napkin neatly beside my untouched plate. My heart was steady. My hands didn't shake. As I walked toward the exit, I felt their eyes on my back, waiting for hesitation, for doubt, for the version of me who would turn around and apologize for taking up space. She didn't exist anymore. Outside, the air was cool and clean. I breathed deeply, feeling something settle into place inside me. This wasn't revenge. This was release. And for the first time, I knew the power didn't come from what I took away from them. It came from what I refused to give back. 3 weeks after the dinner, the first crack appeared. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It came quietly, the way structural failures always do, disguised as a reasonable request. My father emailed me at 6:02 a.m. Subject: paperwork question. No greeting. No apology. Just a paragraph explaining that there was an issue with a trust document tied to a small investment account my parents had set up years ago. Apparently, my name was still listed as an authorized contact. The bank needed clarification. It would be quick. 5 minutes, he wrote. Purely administrative. I read the email twice, then closed my laptop without replying. By noon, my phone rang. You saw the email, my father said when I answered, his tone clipped. I did. So I'm not handling your paperwork anymore, I replied. This isn't babysitting, he snapped. This is financial. I'm not your accountant, I said calmly. I stopped being that when you decided I wasn't family. A pause. Then irritation bled through. You're being petty. No, I said. I'm being consistent. You're listed on the documents, he argued. That makes it your responsibility. That makes it a mistake, I corrected. One you'll need to fix. He exhaled sharply. You're really enjoying this, aren't you? I smiled to myself. I'm enjoying clarity. He hung up without another word. That afternoon, my sister texted. Can you at least help Dad this once he's stressed? I stared at the message, recognizing the familiar pattern. Divide and conquer. Soften the boundary through urgency and guilt. I typed one sentence. I'm not available. She didn't respond. 2 days later, Aunt Helen called. They're scrambling, she said without preamble. Your mother tried to log into an account she's never touched before, locked herself out. Twice. I sighed quietly. I don't want them to suffer. They're not suffering, Helen replied. They're adapting. Poorly. The next week brought more consequences. My sister missed a work deadline because childcare fell through. Derek snapped at my mother during a phone call, something he'd apparently never done before. My father showed up unannounced at the bank branch he'd retired from, only to be told policy had changed and he needed proper documentation. None of this reached me directly. It arrived filtered secondhand, stripped of drama. What did reach me was something else entirely. An email from a former colleague asking if I was open to a leadership role on a new project. Longer hours, more responsibility, significantly more money. I accepted. The night I signed the contract, I sat alone at my kitchen table with a glass of water and felt something unfamiliar settle into my chest. Pride. Not borrowed. Not conditional. Earned. The following Sunday, my mother called. I almost didn't answer. But something told me this call would be different. Hello? I said. Her voice sounded older, thinner. Your father doesn't know I'm calling. I assumed I replied gently. She hesitated. We're having trouble, she admitted. I waited. With everything, she continued. The house. The kids. The accounts. Things you used to handle without us realizing it. I closed my eyes briefly. That's not my fault. I know, she said quickly. Too quickly. I didn't realize how much you did. There it was. Not an apology, but close enough to be dangerous. I needed you, she added softly. We all did. You needed my labor, I said. Not me. Silence stretched between us. I'm sorry, she said finally. The word sounded unfamiliar in her mouth. I didn't rush to fill the space. What are you sorry for assuming, she said. For not asking. For treating your time like it didn't matter. I let the words sit. They weren't perfect, but they were specific. I appreciate you saying that, I replied. But it doesn't change my boundaries. I'm not asking you to come back, she said quickly. I wanted you to know we see it now. I believed her, and I knew it wasn't enough. Seeing it doesn't undo it, I said. It just means you won't repeat it with someone else. She swallowed audibly. Your sister is angry with me. I almost laughed. That makes two of you. A fragile silence followed. Will you ever come home? She asked. I looked around my apartment. My desk, my calendar, my life. This is home, I said. Now. She didn't argue. After the call, I felt tired. Not drained. Just finished. Like a chapter had closed whether everyone was ready or not. A week later, my father sent one final email. Short, formal. I'm removing your name from all accounts. You'll no longer be listed on anything. I replied with one sentence. That's for the best. He didn't respond. The distance settled into something permanent after that. Not hostile, not warm, neutral, sustainable. I started sleeping better, working better, laughing more easily. One evening as I walked home from dinner with colleagues, my phone buzzed. A message from my sister. I didn't know how much you did. I still don't agree with how you left. But I get why you did. That's all I wanted to say. I stared at the screen, then typed back. Thank you for saying that. Nothing more. I didn't need closure shaped like regret or tears. I needed evidence. And the evidence was everywhere now. In my calendar full of plans no one could cancel for me. In my bank account growing without apology. In my body no longer braced for impact. The justice wasn't loud, it wasn't public. It was quiet and irreversible. They had lost access. And I had gained myself. The first holiday passed quietly. No emergency calls, no last-minute requests, no guilt dressed up as concern. Just a normal Thursday evening with rain tapping against my windows and a grocery bag on the counter waiting to be unpacked. I cooked dinner slowly, deliberately. Nothing fancy. Something warm. Something chosen because I wanted it, not because someone else expected it. As the pot simmered, I realized how unfamiliar this calm still felt, like a muscle I was learning to trust again. Later that night, I sat on the couch scrolling through old photos on my phone. Years of images where I stood at the edge of frames, half cut out, holding someone else's child, someone else's cake, someone else's life together. I didn't feel anger anymore. Just distance. That was new. A few days later, a small envelope arrived in the mail. My handwriting stared back at me, careful and neat. Inside was the spare key to my parents' house, the one I'd carried since I was 18. I hadn't realized I still had it. No note, no explanation. I placed the key in a drawer and closed it gently. Work filled my days now. Real work. Work that challenged me, paid me, and respected my time. My calendar was full, but it belonged to me. No blank spaces waiting to be claimed by someone else's urgency. One afternoon, I caught myself smiling for no reason at all. Not the polite smile I used to wear. A real one. The kind that appears when your body realizes it's safe. My sister stopped calling after that last text. We settled into something distant but civil, occasional updates, neutral emojis, boundaries held by mutual exhaustion rather than understanding, but held nonetheless. My mother sent a card on my birthday. No guilt, no instructions. Just a short message. I hope you're well. I was. My father never reached out again. And strangely, that didn't hurt. Some silences are answers. As winter approached, I made a decision I would have never made before. I booked a short trip, just for myself. No coordination, no approval, no backup plans in case someone needed me to cancel. Standing at the airport gate, boarding pass in hand, I felt the echo of that moment months earlier. The birthday party, the announcement, the sentence that split my life cleanly in two. You are not part of us. They were right in a way they never intended. I wasn't part of a system that only functioned when I disappeared. On the plane, I looked out the window as the city shrank beneath me. Not running, choosing. When I returned, something unexpected happened. A friend asked me for advice. Real advice. Not help disguised as obligation. Not labor disguised as love. I gave it freely, happily. That was the difference. I learned something important over these months. Walking away doesn't make you cruel. Staying when you're being erased does. Justice doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like absence. Like systems collapsing without the person who was quietly holding them together. I didn't win anything they lost. I reclaimed what I'd given away piece by piece. Time, energy, identity. And if you're listening to this wondering whether you're selfish for wanting more, let me say this clearly. You are not abandoning your family by setting boundaries. You are not cruel for refusing to be used. You are not broken for choosing a life that doesn't revolve around someone else's comfort. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to stay and endure. It's to leave without shouting, to build without announcing, to heal without waiting for permission. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been the reliable one, the invisible one, the person everyone leaned on but never looked at, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments what moment made you realize you needed to choose yourself. And if you want to stay with me for more stories like this, stories about boundaries, justice, and quiet revenge that looks like self-respect, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. You're not alone here, and your life gets to be yours.